How's your process? Is it working efficiently? And does it work well with your project management tools? Well, if you're not really sure what's going on with your PM Toolkit, keep listening, because on today's podcast, we're going to discuss how we can develop more efficient process, how we can choose the right tools for our projects and roll them out across our organizations. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ben Aston, founder of The Digital Project Manager. Welcome to the DPM podcast. We're on a mission to help project managers succeed, to help people who manage projects deliver better. We're here to help you take your project game to the next level. Check out thedigitalprojectmanager.com to learn about our training and resources we offer through membership. This podcast is brought to you by Clarizen, the leader in enterprise project and portfolio management software. Visit clarizen.com to learn more. So today I'm joined by Sally Woolston, and Sally is the Digital Project Manager at Nzime. Have I pronounced that right?
No.
Oh, no.
It's all right.
Nzime. How do you pronounce
Nzime.
it?
It's Nzime.
Nzime. Well, that makes more sense.
Yeah, well,
that's the problem with a tricky name, isn't it?
It's our director. He's a creative, so he can't spell things correctly. But it's just Nzime. But yeah.
I like it. I mean, Enzyme makes sense, but I read it as Nzime. But anyway, Sally is Nzime, and they're an agency focused on behavioral insights. And she's managed all kinds of projects from fintech, e-com, recruitment, and retail as well. So hello, Sally.
Hello, Ben.
And sorry you had to correct me on your Nzime.
It's all right. It's all right. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. So obviously you've worked, well, you might have walked as well, but you've worked in lots of different things. And in your LinkedIn profile, while I was stalking you, it mentioned you have this biz dev and sales background. So tell me how you got into project management.
Well, I think similar to a lot of digital project managers, I kind of fell into it almost accidentally. So I was working as a business development manager for an insurance company within a group, a firm, if you like, of a couple of different insurance companies, and it was all the property market. And as a business development manager for this company, I was dealing with the internal development team quite regularly. And it just kind of got to me that there was a lack of there was no process, there was no kind of structure. It was just a bit of a first come, first serve, who can get the devs, around the kettle to get their project in first. So it was from being, I suppose, almost a client of the internal team that I kind of said, look, guys, we really need to put some structure to this. And my manager at the time just said, okay, you're the project manager now. And I was like, okay. So I had to do a little bit of learning on the job. But that's kind of how I fell into it.
Nice. And was that like a promotion at the time, or was that a punishment?
A little bit of both. It was difficult for sure. It was very complex, and it was something that I had no idea. I didn't know anything about software development, about a creative process. We did Scrum at the time, and we did it quite well. Retrospectively, now I know that. But I had no idea, which is actually the digitalprojectmanager.com and the Slack channel was a really useful tool for me to just kind of learn things as I was going, because it's all, it's a good community and people just share, I suppose, that insight, and that was really useful for me.
Awesome. Well, that's what we like to hear. That's why it's there. So, I mean, knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self on that day where you were assigned that punishment or promotion to project manager? What's your biggest thing that you've or biggest mistake that you made right at the beginning, where you're like, if I could do that again, I would have done that really differently?
I don't think there's not like one big mistake. I think that comes to mind, just to see lots of little ones. No, I think it just, I think having an attitude that you can always learn from everyone around you, and that I think that just paying a lot of attention to what's happened before you, particularly if you're taking over a project, what's happened before you and why has it failed and what do you need to do differently. So I suppose just paying more attention to the people and the situation, and letting that kind of direct you as opposed to going in. And I think I maybe thought that I knew a little bit too much early on.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think stakeholder engagement is so important. I think when we're at the beginning of our careers, maybe we are focused on the project itself and delivering stuff, rather than maybe so much the stakeholders involved in the project, the team, and value and how we're generating value. We kind of can sometimes get caught up so much in, well, I've just got to get this thing out the door. But we have to remember that human people element too, and the value that we're generating at the end of it.
That's it. And dealing with different characters as well, and different personalities that don't think in the same way that you think, and that don't have the same requirements that you do. So yeah, like you say, when you're just as a PM, if you're just focusing on budget and deadline and getting things out, then you can miss such an important part of the process, which is, are my stakeholders or my clients, are they benefiting from this process, or is it just, you're just ticking boxes and completing things as you go? So yeah, stakeholder management is still a very complex part of my role, which I'm still refining.
Yeah. So, I mean, can you tell us what kind of projects you're working on now specifically?
Yeah. So we are, as you mentioned, we're an agency. So we've got clients through, different industries. But our bread and butter is really strategy and insight. And they usually transpose into either e-commerce, website builds, or campaigns, be that, ECRM or social strategy, things like that. So a bit of a mixture.
Nice. And so tell us about like a typical kind of strategy project then for you. So are you working with like small online retailers or bigger kind of brands? Can you talk us through that strategy process? Because we're going to dive into the process in a minute when we talk about tools. But can you help kind of us understand the context of these like strategy, UX design, dev projects in that e-com space?
Yeah, so a lot of our clients are, it's not something that we've strategically focused on, but we have ended up with quite a few clients, and I think that's just because we've got quite good at understanding this industry. But they're within trade, so builders, merchants, and a lot of Saint-Gobain is an international brand that we work quite a lot with, and a few others. So it's not necessarily sexy brands. It's not nice. What you'd think of as cool, but there's such a huge market for trade. And I think what we've managed to do, particularly with the strategy side of things, is go into a business, talk to them about what their actual offering is, and help them understand their business a little bit better, and then translate that into a digital ecosystem. So is that a new website, or are you communicating effectively on socials, or, are you where you need to be? So it's the strategy side of things tends to be a lot of communication. So we'll do workshops and we'll do meetings. So it kind of falls a little bit outside of the processes as far as the tools go, because that's almost like the procurement of the project. And then once a strategy has been identified and we've got a project as an outcome, then we'll kind of get into the UX and the design, and then hopefully development and delivery.
Cool. And I think I want to still dig deeper into this, like strategy deliverables though, because I think it's something that you'll often hear people talk about. And if you don't actually work in agencies that are doing this kind of strategic engagements at the beginning of a project, you talked about a workshop and, developing a strategy and a digital ecosystem. But in terms of the deliverables, are you doing journey mapping? Are you doing a service blueprint, a lean model canvas? What are the kind of outputs, or what does that, how do you develop that ecosystem?
Well, I suppose it will depend on obviously what the clients, what they're dealing with, what kind of issues they've got. So, often it will be that they're not effectively communicating their services or their products. Right. And, from that, maybe it's the senior leadership team or the board within a company who have a disconnect from the people, on the ground. And usually that discommunication means that the digital strategy is maybe not quite right. So you've got the decision makers basically not having the right insight and the right feedback from the people on the ground. And what our kind of workshops do is they connect the two. So we get the people, hopefully usually marketing managers or brand managers or people dealing, with the website or, the socials, help them understand the audience, help them understand the consumer, and how their behaviours are online a little bit better. And then the output for the project can vary so drastically. So something we're doing more recently is identifying, it might just be, okay, so you're on social media, but you may be on the wrong platforms and your content might not be quite right because you're talking about the wrong things, or you're not speaking to your audience in a way which they understand. So it's almost like a kind of business consultancy or a marketing consultancy workshop that we do, and that then transposes hopefully into some work for us. Nice.
So in this kind of role where you're the project manager, and you talked about in your article that you wrote, some of the challenges of different process inefficiencies and things. But are there any other challenges that you find yourself particularly dealing with this year or at the moment? What are you trying to get better at?
I think a big one for me and a focus for me this year is communication, effectively communicating, because this is not just for your clients or for your stakeholders, this is for your internal team as well, because often as the project manager, you're kind of at least the one person who touches all the different departments within an agency. So you have to be able to understand different character types, how they like to be communicated to, when to step back. And that all kind of ties into, I'm trying to boost productivity, so helping getting my studio guys in flow a little bit more frequently and less interruptions. But yeah, communication is kind of my main focus for this year, and just better, understanding different characters.
And are you using any tools to help you do that, or other than this kind of big picture goal of let's get better at comms? Yeah. How are you? What does that journey look like?
I'm reading quite a lot about it. So there are reading and kind of YouTube about productivity and about understanding different people. There's some channels I like, better ideas, or Matt Devella has some good stuff on sort of productivity. But no, I'm reading mostly, trying to get better.
Have you read any good books recently?
I'm in the middle of one which is called, How to Have Meaningful Conversations. I don't remember the author, but that's quite interesting. It's about how, some people can just go and have a really big discussion, or they understand when they need to have a big discussion. Other people get, super frightened by the idea of confrontation, and that can kind of shy away, and then what manifests as a result of not having a conversation. So I mean, in this book there are some big examples, like I want to divorce you but I can't talk about it, but like translating the ideas into more day-to-day things that you can just when you're talking to your colleagues, for example, or when you're talking to your clients, how to approach a conversation.
Yeah, no, sounds interesting. Cool. So I'm wondering if, with the new decade that we are now in, mm-hmm. Have you found anything recently that has made your life awesome? I mean, you've just talked about some books that you're reading. You've got some goals for the year ahead. But is there anything else that you've discovered that you think everybody else should know about that is making your life awesome?
Well, we're only 22 days in. Maybe,
yeah, but come on, nearly a whole month.
No, not one thing, I suppose. I think
it doesn't just have to be this.
No, I am trying to make a bit of an effort on, reading a little bit more and not just consuming, rubbish information like Netflix all the time. So yeah, just that's.
There's some good information there.
There is, yeah. Well, I'll reserve my comments for Netflix documentaries.
Good stuff. Well, let's get back to your post in this topic of picking project management tools for your agency. And if you haven't read the post yet that we're going to talk about, check it out on the digitalprojectmanager.com. The post is actually called Agency Growth Secrets. But in it, Sally's talking about how setting up your team with the right tools can be a great catalyst for your agency's growth. And why is that? Well, it's because when you have your teams buy in with the process and the workflows and the tooling to work with that, the team's going to be a lot more engaged and can work a lot more efficiently. So I want to drop into this discussion by talking about the process when you go about picking new tools, how you engage the team, collect the requirements, create a shortlist, decide what to trial and make a decision. Because I think this is a challenge that many people will have. They know things aren't quite working right with their agency. It seems like maybe the process isn't well defined, the tools aren't really working, and then often people will have a suite of tools, some one-trick ponies that are great for a specific task, but the choice is, do you have this a herd of one-trick ponies that work well together and integrate with each other with APIs and stuff? Or do you have one tool to rule them all and try to work through one tool? So this is a challenge that I know many people face. So I wanted to talk to Sally about this part of her post, which is really about choosing a tool, how you go through that process, and how you then roll out the tool to your team. So I know in your post, Sally, you were talking about you've been running the agency for a while, and you identified that you had some of these less than ideal habits. I wonder if you can talk to me a bit about what those habits were and how you identified that, there were some things that were less than ideal, because I think inertia and the status quo can sometimes blind us to that.
Well, for me, it was really obvious that the things that weren't working. You mentioned that it's common that there'll be a suite of tools within an agency. And for us, that looked, I think there was 5 or 6 different ones. It was kind of like we had Asana, we had Harvest, we had some of the scheduling thing, and we had an invoicing, and there was spreadsheets everywhere. And so what we were doing is, between the client service department and the studio, we were duplicating so much work. So, we'd get an email maybe from a client, or maybe that client was using Asana, who knows, there's no protocol. And then we would, send that over to the studio to get a quote. And then that would end up going back in the studio as a task named similarly to the actual work brief. And then clients were feeding back somewhere else. And it was obvious that it wasn't working, that there was just an awful amount of effort. But I suppose if it's not that obvious, then one thing that I do sort of regularly, kind of at least every quarter with the studio, is I'll just send a Google questionnaire. And that's kind of a nice way for me to get the concise information that I'm looking for. So that might be, do you always have the brief that you need? Do you always have enough time? Can you access your schedule quite easily? So I can send out a little questionnaire to my studio, get their feedback, and 9 times out of 10, things that within either the client services or, my department that we think are going well, it's a different story for the studio. So that's if it's not so obvious, but you've just got a bit of an inkling that something could be easier, just ask everyone, just ask people, ask your clients, say, is it actually easy for you to report a bug to us? Or, do you have easy access to the status of that once it comes out? Just, like I say, communication.
Yeah. And I think so often, what can happen is, and I'd be curious if this is the case for you guys at Nzime, the process and the workflows that work when an agency is 5 to 10 people are not the same that work when an agency is 30 people.
Right.
And sometimes the process and the operations don't keep up with the growth of the agency.
Right.
And that's when things can begin to fall apart. And you kind of hit these points in the agency growth. Maybe the next one's at 50 people, the next one's at 100 people, where the process has to change and the workflows have to be adapted because you've got more people involved. Sure. Is that true of you guys?
We're not that big. We are a team of 10, but I think inevitably, you do need to, there are moments when you need to scale your processes, but in order to scale them, they need to be set in the first place. So if you're just, kind of working on a bit of an ad hoc basis, and, you can even if you're a team of 2, your processes can't be the same if you're a team of 10, because you might not have the same departments, you might not have the same roles. So I would say starting by having a set process and, a set almost kind of house rules of how things work within your agency, about having an identity of how you work, makes it easier to scale when you do. But I think whatever point you get to, that you do need to think about changing things. And the approach we take is it's always changing, because we're constantly taking a checkup on, is this still efficient, or is this not actually working out? We're kind of always changing. But I think if you have processes already set in place that you can scale, and if you've already identified what the problem is before you need to scale, then I think that becomes a lot of more of an easy task.
Great. And so one of the things that you, talked about was, having a questionnaire, talking with the team and with the client about, hey, do you think we're working efficiently? And one of the things you mentioned was, hey, we're duplicating work, updating multiple platforms. We've got it in Resource Guru, we've got it in Asana. It's the same job, it's the same information, and we're just copying and pasting between different things and sheets as well.
Exactly.
Was there anything else where you found like these major inefficiencies in the process or in the tooling?
I think within the process, certainly our collaboration internally has improved an awful lot. So that, just is that it's a daily stand-up? Does everyone have access to the same kind of boards and the same documentation? Are you just getting together, regularly? Enough FaceTime? Even things like the actual setup of the studio, does it allow people to just kind of like turn around and have a conversation? Or, I absolutely love Slack, but, sometimes you do just need to have a face-to-face, and it's, I would.
Yeah. Yeah, and in your post you talked as well about so other kind of triggers maybe to look for if you're thinking, hey, I'm not sure if our process is working very well or our tooling. One of the things, you talked about inconsistent communication with clients, lack of process in the team, inaccurate reporting, time wasting, a daunting onboarding process because you've got so many different tools to try and explain to people. So let's talk through this process that you went through for finding a new tool and looking at your process and working out how you match a tool to your process. Now, obviously, some tools dictate a particular process, and that can be good because they're kind of tried and tested processes, and sometimes you can adapt the process to a certain extent. But often with these big tools, what they'll do is, if it includes invoicing and billing and estimating and the entire project workflow, it'll force you to work through a particular way.
Right.
And I think that's why many people end up taking like a suite of one-trick ponies because then you can kind of adapt the process as you need to. But let's talk through this process. And at a high level, this is what I'm guessing that you did. And you can tell me whether or not I'm right. And then we're going to dig into each one of these. So, and you kind of mentioned this in your post, but first of all, talking to the team, engaging the team, and defining the process with them, collecting the requirements for the tool, creating a short list of tools, deciding what to trial, making a decision on a tool, testing that tool then in a kind of live beta environment, and then rolling it out across all your projects. Yeah. Did it look anything like that?
Yeah, basically. But I was fortunate that that my management team just kind of said, this is the number one priority task, and you just do it until you get it right. So that was, I had the luxury of time, which I think is where a lot of, it's such especially if you're in an agency and it's fast paced and you've got multiple clients and you've got deadlines and everything's going off, you probably don't have time to be like, what's the actual information? What should I ask the studio? How can I make their working environment a little bit more, efficient so that it ultimately benefits everyone? So I had the luxury of time, which made this entire process doable. But yeah, it looked pretty much something like that. So
when you say the luxury of time, how much time did it take from deciding, hey, something needs to change, to now everybody being on board with the new process and the new tool?
Yeah, it took, the first draft, because we obviously ended up on Monday.com, and I did manage to get pretty much all of the tools rehouse them in that one. So it took about, from really starting to seriously consider the project, to rolling it out in a beta environment, was about 4.5, maybe 5 months. So that's an awful amount, an investment of time that if you, and like I say, if I'm doing that pretty much as my number one priority, it could easily take so much longer than that, to the point where you just like, forget it. I'll just continue using all of these different tools because it's not great, but it's working. So I was fortunate that I did have the kind of green light to just really focus. Yeah.
And I think one takeaway for people who are thinking about changing the tools, be aware that it will take a lot of time. And I think you're saying, hey, I had the luxury of time, but I think that's kind of realistic timeline for most people, unless their agency is super small. Anytime you're implementing a new tool, this process from engaging the team to rolling it out completely can take at least 4 months. It could take a year, depending on how long your projects are, because you're not really wanting to switch projects to the new system and process while they're already underway. So that's something to think about. So let's talk about engaging the team and mapping out your process. So, I mean, you talked about in your post how maybe different teams are doing things in different ways or on different projects. Your process wasn't fully aligned. Mm-hmm. How did you actually get some kind of agreement on, hey, this is how we're going to work and this is how projects happen?
Well, didn't just tell people what to do, but I did just kind of say, look, I really believe this is the best way for us all to move forward. And I suppose, I started by, as I said, the different departments, so the studio, the clients, the client services, the finance team. What does everyone need to do in their day-to-day? And is it even possible to collate all of those, or is it not? So once we kind of had the key list of what everybody needs to do, I suppose from there it was just about looking at, as you pretty much hit the nail on the head, where you kind of said that a lot of these tools will force your processes around the tools. So if it does, quoting and invoicing and project management and reporting and absolutely everything, you're probably going to have to work in the way that it wants you to. Yeah. So I started by, once I kind of had a bit of an idea of how what everyone's doing and what they want out of the tool. What are the kind of common points that we can take out of that and adapt to different project types? So all that really is we need to be able to collaborate quite easily between teams and with our clients. It needs to be user friendly because it's client facing. We need to be able to quickly and detail in a more detailed view, take a look at the status of a project from its actually where it's at from a progress point of view and also from a budgeting point of view. And that was pretty much it. We needed, there needed to be some sort of scheduling, but the main, I suppose, is kind of like a common, it's known, isn't it, that you get 80% of your value from 20% of your features. Yeah. And so I just kind of adapted that, and I thought, if that's all we really make it much more simple than we think it is. I don't need to know, for example, if I'm looking at scheduling, I might not need to know, even though I can on Monday, how many hours on which exact day with which exact person. All I really needed to do was know that this is going to happen in this time. So I suppose simplifying the requirements made it a lot easier.
Yeah, and so did you map those out in a document or a spreadsheet, or was this in a kind of collaborative whiteboarding session with different people? How did that actually work in practice? Yeah,
it was a iterative kind of approach. So I'd go away, take on board some of the comments and the feedback, and then I'd present it back to a couple of the team members, and then they'd feedback, and then I'd go back and work on it again. And by this point, I was running free trials of about, 4 or 5 different softwares.
Okay.
So I'd set up all of these free trials, and I'd put a load of dummy data in, and then I'd made a few different profiles, and it was literally, this is what I mean, it's time consuming. And then it was literally kind of commenting, feeding back. Can I, give access? Can I see that? So it was a lot of trial and error. And then once I had a few of those different kind of boards set up and I was most confident with Monday, then I ran with that to present to the team and, get their feedback and then maybe make some tweaks and then kind of go back. So I made sure that I was, throughout the entire process of trying to design these processes, that I was always considering the users. So that's where it's quite similar to how hopefully you would map out, a website build or something. You're going to constantly check back in with your stakeholders to make sure that you're going in the right direction.
Yeah. So you obviously, in terms of defining the process and the requirements around that process, you were focused more on the requirements themselves rather than, hey, this is how our project gets from new business through to invoicing. Because I know that you were talking about you had this homegrown invoicing tool or job creation thing.
Yeah.
So how did that kind of fit into it? How did you map out your process first and then decide on a single way that you were going to work across all projects, and that how you got the requirements? Or did you just say, hey, let's just focus on the requirements, which are the core activities that are, consistent throughout all projects?
More so we had obviously the set requirements that we needed. And I think what helped me land on Monday was that you can create the different kind of boards and you can create them to do what you need them to do. So it was kind of like, once I'd started to understand how Monday works, I was thinking, okay, can I create a board that replicates the schedule? Yes. And then I was like, can I create a board that replicates the invoicing? Yes. Can I create a board that replicates the project management for the client? Yes. And then once I understood that I could tie it all together, it was kind of like the requirements came first and then the process. And it was kind of like a kind of happy coincidence, if you know what I mean. So I was looking for tools. I would have been happy. It would have been nice to have everything housed on the same program, but if that wasn't going to work, then I wasn't precious about it. So I was just about what's maybe the best for the individual requirements, what does them the best, and then if there were to have been separate programs for our needs, then I would have looked at how can I connect them all, and maybe the process would have been different. But I suppose we were quite lucky that everything that we really needed we could create on Monday because of its flexibility.
Yeah. And I think what you're describing here, I think is really interesting in that I think, at the beginning of this, I said, hey, this is the process. Engage the team, define the process, collect requirements, create a shortlist, decide what to trial, make a decision, roll it out. But actually part of defining the process is what you're talking about here is, well, at the same time as you're doing that, look at the tools and what they can do and think about how you might be able to work with them and do those two in tandem. This doesn't necessarily have to be a purely linear process. So one thing I want to ask, though, is you obviously made a short list of tools. You talked about doing different trials with different tools, sticking in demo data and trying different things out. How did you get to that point where you're like, okay, well, these are the 4 or 5 or 10, however many it was, that I'm going to trial and start testing out? I actually got there through the Slack channel with the DPM Slack channel. I think I mentioned that because there's a whole channel obviously dedicated to tools. And so I thought, I can go on all of their websites and read about their features and what they're saying about their product. Obviously, they're going to say it's great for project management. But what was the actual experience like from within an agency, within a setup and, the business model, which is similar to ours. So Monday was popping up a lot on the Slack channel, as was Rike and Trello. But I just thought Trello I do like it, but it's just a little bit too, there's not enough to it. And I know that there's a lot of APIs and things that you can build into it, but I didn't want to get that. I didn't want to get that messy with it because I think as soon as you start doing that, you start looking at the what can all of the tools do, and then how can I use the tools? And I was trying to reverse that. Yeah. Cool. And so, just to say, if people are looking for shortlists of tools, head to the digitalprojectmanager.com/tools, where you'll see a list of tools for all kinds of different use cases. So that's a great place to start. And then, as Sally's talking about as well, join us on Slack and ask people what they're using as you're kind of making that decision. So you trialed out Monday. You thought, okay, this is working. How did you then kind of test that in your real world environment before you rolled it out across all your projects?
Well, that was, again, quite a lot of effort. We ended up rolling it out to our clients, I think, from memory, it was about a month after we trialed it internally. So for, I think, at least a month, we were internally kind of copying, pasting everything over to Monday and then having the studio manage everything through Monday, and then client services for us, we were doing everything kind of twice. But I think we had to do that because if it didn't work out and we just got all our clients excited and changed everything for them, and then a week later turned around and said, oh, actually, that's not kind of working. That was a big concern. We wanted to make sure that as soon as we went out with it, we were happy, we were confident on how we could educate our clients on how to use it and that it would address issues that they had raised. So maybe it's, again, just not the same protocol for different clients. Some of them weren't finding it all that easy to track the progress of certain tasks, or where do they report things to? Who do they kind of who do they talk to? Is it an email? How do they check, all of their billings and things like that? So, but yeah, to actually roll it out was we took about a month, and we took our time with it.
Right. And so in that process, I mean, there was part of the process was you chose the tool, you did the dummy data, you then tried to sell it internally. Yeah. You obviously got buy-in there.
Yeah.
And then you're doing the same thing with your clients. You're saying, hey guys, we're going to work in a new way. It's going to be more efficient. And you get their buy-in. What are some kind of tips for getting buy-in? And how much did you have to adapt your process as part of that, kind of engaging with the stakeholders, getting their feedback, adapting it slightly?
Massively, really. I think we're fortunate to have relationships with our clients that we can just have a really candid conversation about, look, we're doing this within our business. It's not quite working for us. And I'm assuming it's been a bit of a pain point for you. And it's just like, yeah, actually, that's not been great. So having that open communication means that you can just, get straight to the point. But I think you usually came down to communication.
Yeah. So did you find that once you introduced the tool that certain clients were like, I want it this way, and someone else said, but I want it that way? How did you manage that? Or even stakeholders or your team saying, I don't like it. How do you deal with that?
Well, I suppose with clients, they only really see their project board. So again, with Monday, you can, if it's about changing, terminology of a status or adding a few extra columns, you can just kind of do that, and it doesn't affect anything internally too massively. So the client then feels like they've got a bit more control over, and it might bring massive value to them if they can just add an extra column or tweak something on their board. So that was one benefit of Monday. But internally, my colleagues, they're fairly easygoing. They definitely let me know if something's not quite right, or if it's not efficient, or if it's just a bit of a pain, and they'll let me know. But there's not been anything major that's come up that's not had a workable solution. And that, again, I think I just have to put down to the just how dynamic Monday is.
Yeah. Well, so obviously, Sally, you're a big fan of Monday.com, and in the post itself, actually, Sally does a whole walkthrough of how they're using Monday.com to manage their agency, their clients, their resourcing, and tracking everything in there. So if you're interested in taking a peek at how process can look in an agency using Monday.com, who actually happen to be one of our partners as well. So it's always fun to talk about them. Then check it out on the digitalprojectmanager.com. But I think, Sally, I just want to close by asking you, I mean, you've obviously gone through this process. It took a really long time. For someone who's about to do this, they're like, okay, I need to look at my process. I need to look at my tools. I need to decide, and we'll really work out how we can make this work better. Mm-hmm. What are some of your big kind of takeaways, or if you're going to do it again, that you'd do differently?
I think before you start, you need to know what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Right. And then that's going to make your task a lot easier. If you're, quite literally like me, you're like, actually, it would be easier for me to identify what is working, because it was just so much going on. Then I just, go back to the different people that are involved in the processes. And you might end up changing your processes, which has nothing to do with your tools. So it might be a case of, you need more regular meetings. You need to get together before, during, and after a project, which I'm assuming is quite surprising that some people don't, to just, check how things are going or how they've been. So identify your main problem, and then check in with everyone who's using the processes, and just kind of get their feedback and see if they've got the same pain points that you do. And if they do, then I suppose that's going to give you a good place to start. And if not, well, then maybe you don't have a problem.
Yeah, and I think you're so right. And I think this is just a really valuable insight. If you're thinking about changing your tools, don't do it in isolation from thinking about your process, and getting the process sorted and getting alignment on how a project gets from new business through to invoicing, the steps along the way, the touch points internally with the team and with your client. I think it's really valuable to align on that and get clarity on what people really need before just diving into a tool because it looks cool, which can be the temptation as project managers. We're like, hey, this is shiny and new, let's do this.
And I was so reluctant because Monday, they go so hard with their their PPC. And it was annoying. It was like, fine, I'll check out your product. And then when I liked it, I was like, damn. but I do like it. But it was, I'm glad you were partnered, but there's no affiliation or anything like that. My end.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Sally, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really interesting.
Cool. Thank you very much for having me.
And if you want to learn more and get ahead in your work, come and join us with DPM membership. Head to the digitalprojectmanager.com/membership so you can get access to our Slack team, templates, workshops, office hour, ebooks, and more. And I'd love to know what you think about Monday.com, what you think about implementing new processes and tools. Comment on the post. Tell us what works, what doesn't. Tell us your hacks, tips, and tricks for onboarding new tools and selecting them too. I'd love to hear your fail stories and wins. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and stay in touch on the digitalprojectmanager.com. But until next time, thanks for listening.